Welcome to the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast.
Absolutely. It is so rewarding to see how much people enjoy it. And it's a bit addictive to solve constant problems, right? I mean, if that's your thing, right? And, I'd say the people who end up in those roles tend to sort of, it's fun. It's fun being able to get this sorted, and you're working with a lot of competent people.
Well, for me, the action is the juice. I'm in.
Say the word, Chef.
Let it rip.
All right, folks, here we go. Episode 115 of the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. Episode 115, and holy cow, what a fun one. Barb Campbell, out of Canada, loves racing, loves sport, adventure racer, endurance runner. And what's wild is that she has so much energy and enthusiasm, the most laughs per episode I've ever had. And the best part is I had to drag her onto the show. She resisted. She said, no, I have no stories. I'm not good. And all we did was chat and laugh and talk for well over an hour. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to Barb. She's a delight. She does such a nice job talking about all of the races, especially Wilderness Traverse, which she is so active and involved in. You'll notice that we pick up mid-sentence, and the race that we're talking about is exactly that, Wilderness Traverse. We never had a formal opening. The mics came on, and we just started talking. So we jump in mid-conversation. And we're so glad that you're here. Winter is tough. It's a tough time. Things are kind of dark. Days are long. And we hope that the Dark Zone gives you a respite from the rest of the world that's out there. We hope that our stories and our common bond over adventure racing and teamwork gives you a sense of joy and comfort that maybe you find in other places, maybe you don't. But we are so happy that you are here. So sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of the Dark Zone. And remember, if you keep racing, we'll keep talking.
Proudy's Chimney Sweep is the preferred chimney service company of adventure racers in the Shenandoah Valley, and a proud sponsor of this episode of The Dark Zone. Our line of Regency and MF Fire wood stoves are guaranteed to dry up your socks after a wet day in the woods, and you can always count on Proudy's to make sure your wood stove is ready to heat up some ramen on the coldest of winter days, even when those unfortunate power outages happen. Give us a call, unless you live in 49 and a half of the states we don't service. Check us out at www.chimneysweepva.com. Happy adventuring.
Imagine a world where young women in Afghanistan and Pakistan rise above societal constraints, embracing their strength and potential. Ascend Athletics is making this vision a reality. Through mountaineering-based leadership training, Ascend empowers girls and women aged 15 to 24 to become courageous leaders in their communities. By conquering physical summits, these young women build self-esteem and develop skills that last a lifetime. Operating since 2015 in Afghanistan, expanding to Pakistan in 2023, Ascend focuses on regions where gender inequality is most pronounced, providing tools for girls and women to lead empowered lives. Join the Dark Zone in supporting these brave young women as they climb towards a brighter future. Visit ascendathletics.org to learn more about and contribute to this transformative mission. And remember, Ascend pays nothing for the spot. We love the work that they do, and the Dark Zone is happy to support it. That's a big race. That's dare I use the term legendary, Barb? Am I overstating the quality of that race?
I don't know if Randy will let you use the word legendary, but I would say it's the de facto Canadian adventure racing championship. We have the 24-hour distance. Now that we've got some expeditions out west, we've got some competition, I guess. But for a long time, that's kind of how people would have seen us.
So with Wilderness Traverse being what it is, right, and having that storied role, if you will, in Canadian adventure and doing so well, right, and you're so involved in Wilderness Traverse, you've also been in the sport for quite a while. How many years would you say that you've been in and around adventure racing? What would you, if you traced back at the calendar?
First race was September 2002.
Okay. So now, over 20 years of you being wrapped up in the world of adventure racing. Tell us about that first race of yours. How did you get involved in it?
Well, we were doing a fair bit of mountain biking, and we got inspired to try a 24-hour team relay mountain bike race. And we had a great time doing that. And somebody gave us some VHS tapes and said, here's our Eco Challenge. And if you like 24-hour mountain bike racing, you'd love Eco Challenge. So, of course, 2002 is about the time of the last race.
Yep.
So around then, we got all the VHS tapes given to us by friends about the time that Eco Challenge had stopped. But the cool thing for us was that in trying an adventure race in Southern Ontario, we had like Dave Zietsma, Lawrence Foster, Bob Miller, a lot of the big names that had been representing Canada were racing alongside us or helping to design the course or whatever. So you kind of felt like, hey, this is worldwide. These are world-class adventure racers and we're brushing up against fame. And these are the guys we saw on TV. So it was pretty cool.
So I'll tell you this, it's funny. And I want to get this early into our recording our episode, Barb, is I'm on the hunt to track down someone from Eco Challenge that I'm on a personal quest to get them to re-release those episodes somehow. Because, to a person, rare is the Dark Zone guest that does not reference Eco Challenge in some capacity, either the old ones or the new ones. So if you still have those VHS tapes, we're going to talk further because those are worth a pretty penny. What was it about when you look back on that? You did the mountain. You were doing the mountain biking, and you got into adventure racing, and you had the tapes, and you intermingled with Bob and everybody else that was involved in it. What did that do for you in terms of your racing? Like, why did you stick with it for so long? What was it about the sport that jumped out at you?
Well, it's interesting. I wasn't an athlete. I dropped phys ed the first opportunity I had, which was when I was 13 years old. I'm a nerd. I'm still a nerd, but I really, focused on that. I did maths and sciences particularly and studied engineering, and sports were for people who were coordinated enough to hit a volleyball. They weren't for me, and that's kind of how things were. And then in university, I was lucky enough to spend a couple of terms working out in the Canadian Rockies, which introduced me to the outdoors. So then, so that's like sort of early 20s. And then I was doing lots of backpacking. Like I went up to the Arctic. I did kayaking in Greenland. We did whitewater canoeing up north. We did a lot of very cool outdoor trips. And I think had we never encountered those VHS tapes, that would have been our lifetime, probably of, different outdoor adventures in Canada and around the world. And we had never thought that the kinds of things we did were sports, and we weren't athletes. We went mountain biking, but we weren't, the 24-hour race is very much a fun race, like we always made sure we had a kid on the team and, that kind of thing. And suddenly it was just really surprising to learn, like, oh, you mean we can just use a map like we always do when we go canoeing, and we already own a canoe, so we can go out and practice, like all these things that we're already doing. Who knew they were a sport? And it looks like super fun when you see Ian Adamson and Nathan Fave doing it. So surely it'll be fun when we do it.
Well, and it's true when you point that out. It's nice as you talk about it, you unpack it. It's interesting how you had this outdoor skill set that existed, right? The kayaking, the ability to be outside, to traverse, to be in the Rockies. And the Canadian Rockies are just something else, right? It's very funny, too, because within the past, 10 days, 8 people have referenced the Canadian Rockies to me. So I think the universe is telling me I should get on a plane. But then you had all this outdoor experience. And to your point, you were not a ball sport athlete. Very common dynamic in adventure racing. Very common in climbing, outdoor stuff. And then you were able to marry your outdoor skill set to a competitive skill set. But it sounds like from the very beginning that you were kind of right-sized about the competition part of it, that you weren't looking to eat people alive. You wanted to race hard, don't get me wrong, but you wanted to, you never took away, you never lost the idea that it was a recreation fun-based activity.
Correct. We didn't come in as athletes, any of us. Like we started our original team that I raced with for a number of years at the beginning. And when I say my adventure racing team, I still think of the team I started with back in 2002. And we stuck together. I don't know. I think 2 of the guys largely retired sort of, about 6-7 years later. One of them continued for a few more races. But none of us were athletes. We were all people. Well, one is my husband.
Okay.
but the other two, I was a technical person at a software company, and one of them was the sales rep that I was paired with when we went to clients. And the fourth member was our biggest client. And the cool thing about him was that, I mean, he was our biggest client. And so if he said, come over Friday afternoon to talk to me, we had to go. I mean, that was part of the thing. But he would often say, and bring your rollerblades, because we're going to go around Toronto Island and we're going to talk about that $1 million software deal that I'd like to do. So, I mean, that was all very cool. So we did not get into it. Our goal, we used to say for the first 2-3 years, is we want to finish the whole course second last.
Right. Right.
That was our goal.
That's an aspiration, right? That's like you want to touch the entire course. It's a shout out to, Mary Foster, who's been on the show. You want to touch the whole course and you want to enjoy yourself along the way.
Yeah. And we'd like to feel like there's one team we can beat. We didn't care about two. We just wanted to feel like that was our competitive goal. And I can still remember, because that 2002 didn't go well. Well, actually, it went extraordinarily well. I just was too scared to do the last 500-meter bushwhack on a compass bearing. I was in exactly the right spot, but it was almost sunset. And in my outdoor world, you don't do that. Right. You don't head into some weird outdoor place. And we were 500 meters from the finish line. We went out and went 5 kilometers around. But in any case, so we went and we took an orienteering course. And then the next race we did was, it was just on foot, and it's Raid the Hammer, which is in Southern Ontario. It's teams of 3 on foot, orienteering about 25K. And I still remember all these years, we were 44th out of 82 teams, because I spent ages analyzing what we could have done compared to the 43rd and what we did better than the 45th team and all of that. And
so what did you find in the beginning? What was so clearly your analytical brain met a physical activity you really enjoyed. So how did you grow in the beginning? Think of the newer racer right now listening to the podcast, right? And there's that learning curve that you want to get better. What did you do to get better as a from the technical part of the race of being a racer?
Well, I mean, some advice I always give people is to jump in. I mean, don't jump into a 5-day race, but just try something, don't be afraid of a 4-hour race or an 8-hour race. I mean, you're going to be fine. Usually you're pretty close to roads and they've got great safety in place. And honestly, we learned so much by doing that first race. We'd been given advice that was maybe a little much about, how much you should wear. Like, oh, you're going to want to wear all these layers because you're going to get scratched. And so we were so hot. We were just we had way too much on, and we had gaiters and all this stuff. So we learned by doing. So we learned a little bit about that. But the biggest thing I learned is that I needed to be comfortable navigating. And so we went and we took, they say, a few courses. And through that winter, we started doing orienteering races. And I always tell people, especially for a woman who goes out into the woods alone a lot, learning orienteering has given me such confidence and comfort. I just always feel like I know where I am. I know how I could get somewhere else. It's just great. Now, when we go on our regular outdoor trips that aren't any kind of race, there's always some navigation. But I always feel like, in an emergency, I'm so much more useful now. Yeah. So I would say for me, the biggest thing was focusing on navigation, even just going out and doing a half-hour sprint around a university, just to have a map in my hand. Yeah. Even, we printed off our own maps, as lots of people do, and created our own courses and just practiced. We went out we live beside a conservation area. So we'd print out the topo map, which is completely inappropriate. But you can find a 4-kilometer line through the conservation area that doesn't have most of the trails on it. And you can just try, doing that. So we had so much fun. And I would say that is because I finally was willing to use the word athlete after a few years, but it took me a long time because that was a lot of years of just not identifying that way. Right. But I still would say that my strength is navigation. It's not, when we start off at the beginning and everybody's running fast, I'm going to be at the end pretty comfortable with that, though, and just hoping that some of the checkpoints are really hard.
Well, you recognize you kind of bring alive the idea when it comes to racing navigation. And another guest have talked about this. We had a guest on the show one time that talked about that. He was able to be lazy with his navigation. I put lazy in quotes there because he knew that he was so fast that when he made a mistake, he could correct it, he can get better. It sounds like you kind of had the opposite approach. Right. That I'm going to move studiously, and I'm not going to pay attention to the teams around me, and I'm just going to go forward in the right direction, and the speed will be the speed will be the speed.
That's right. We learned early on, and I mean, we were rewarded. Sometimes we'd be very surprised, and I think part of it, and dare I generalize, but I was always the primary navigator on our team. And none of us, as I said, were athletes, and nobody was, at any given point, somebody on our team might be the weakest or the strongest, and it was a different person all the time. So it wasn't like one of those teams where you're, the girl and we're going to tow you. We weren't anything like that. So I wasn't holding anybody back by being the navigator. And I think sometimes women don't get that opportunity as often because they get pulled in because they're interested in the sport. Right. And then strong men pull them in, and then you don't get a map in your hand as often. But I was really lucky to have a number of years where I had, I was the primary navigator and got to think about, we would divide it up and we talked a lot, and here's where we are and here's what I want you to look for, and somebody, measure the time and all that kind of thing. But I'd say that was super, super helpful.
One of the more popular Dark Zone episodes, it's a few episodes back, is with the Mountain Designs Wild Women. Really, really nice episode. Really, and they did a fantastic job, and they had a huge win in Australia. The first all-female team to win an expedition race, like a great interview. And they talked about the idea that it was nice for them to race as a unit of four and feel like there were four people of equal capacity looking at each other, that they weren't getting pulled along drag like that, and I've had the gift that when I've raced on multi-gender teams, I've had the gift of racing with female teammates that smoke me when it comes to capacity. So I've never, they drag me along like, oh God, we got this guy around.
I've had that experience too. I now mostly race on female teams, and they're almost always stronger than me, so I'm used to that too.
So clearly, you put a premium on. You knew you wanted to get better at navigation. You had a mind to do it, the technical mind. You wanted to get better at it. What was and that's a good thing, right? But where else did you? Was it your training? Was it your trekking skills, mountain bike skills? Like, where did you have to improve your performance earlier in your career?
Running. I would say, of all the things, like we used to say early on that we couldn't run. My husband and I both had gimpy knees. We were never going to not have gimpy knees, so we just wouldn't run. But that was okay because adventure racing, you could trek, and that was fine. But after a couple of years, when we started getting slightly better than second last from time to time, we realized we're going to have to work on this. And luckily, one of our occasional teammates is a chiropractor, and he was able to, whip us into shape and
put you back together a little bit.
Yeah. And so we started doing more running. And of course, that helps with everything, with your fitness. So, I would say that was the biggest thing. I mean, we could hike, you get better at bushwhacking, I guess, with practice too. Sure. But
side hilling, I tell you, side hilling is a learned skill. Because it's the way you plant your feet, how tightly you tie your shoes, how you lean against the hill. I mean, when I started racing, side hilling was my kryptonite. Like I would just disintegrate on that. But over time, you build a skill set where you learn to do. You become better at it along the way.
Yeah, I would say too, I mean, once again, it's very nerdy, but we were awfully good. We crushed the spreadsheets. All right, what is the gear for this race? And what did we learn? Like, what are our lessons from our last race? And how are we incorporating them in this race? And here's the spreadsheet, the color coded, who's going to have which kind of gear. And, mine had the pink duct tape on it. And, my husband's had the green, and we still do that. I don't know if our two former teammates still do that, but we all had, everything. Like we talked everything through because we knew we were never going to be, great athletes.
And that's a great lesson, that you realized that you had to hyper focus on the things that you could control to accentuate the speed benefit of doing it well. So moving through TAs quickly, having your gear ready, doing what works for you. And the pre-planning through the spreadsheets, the preparation in the race would help to close the gap between you and, if you will, the faster teams. Like that was your superpower.
Yep. I remember Ian Adamson came to town once and gave it was a half day, full day adventure race seminar. And I remember him saying, you may never be able to run as fast as I do, but you can change your shoes as fast as I do. You can learn to do an awful lot of things as fast as I do. You may look at my paddling and think, oh, I could never paddle like Ian, but there's a lot of other things.
That's a pretty cool life lesson there too.
It was, yeah,
Right.
because it really got us thinking. Now, that said, I'm not the greatest in TAs, and the reason is largely because I really have a battle with my navigation duties and everything else. You got to get all the maps switched around and in the right cases. And I still have to also go to the bathroom like everybody else and, get my new food in my pack and throw out my garbage and all the things they're doing. And so, that was tough. Over time, I started, like one of my teammates is also a good navigator. And so I would give him the bike map. So that started to divide things up. And he's also a stronger biker. And so I do the trek and paddle. And I probably should have done more of that, to be honest, but that helped a little bit and gave me some more time in TAs. But so we would focus on that. And I'll always remember that. The other thing we got just while I'm thinking of his seminar is he used to talk about every week, he would make sure that he had at least one training session in each discipline that was a skills training session, and one that was an endurance, and one that was a speedish kind of a thing. So, you'd think, okay, we're going to go paddling and we're going to paddle, all morning or all day or whatever. Or another time we're just going to do intervals, or another time we're just going to really focus on where we put the paddle in the water, or, that kind of thing. Or mountain biking, I'm going to go do a super technical ride, but it's only an hour long. But tomorrow I'll do the 100-kilometer rail trail, for endurance. So when I was training for longer races, I would try. I mean, I didn't stick to, you would think, given my spreadsheet addiction for adventure racing, that I would have followed a training plan as closely as that. But still, we kind of this was fun in our lives. And we didn't, I never had a coach. None of us, I don't think. Well, no, actually, my husband had an ultra running coach. But generally speaking, we just kind of, it's it's a great day for paddling, so we'll go paddling and maybe we'll throw. But we did try to kind of keep that a little bit in mind, that background.
Well, isn't that always, and you've, dare I say, you've mastered this, and you could certainly walk away from the use of that word when I'm done asking the question. But clearly what's obvious is that you've struck the balance between taking the sport seriously enough to honor the sport and the hard effort, but not taking it so seriously to suck all the life out of it and have it not be fun.
I would agree. I mean, we started late enough to realize we were never going to be super competitive, and that really helped a lot. And it was just this is fun. I mean, we want to do the very best we can, and the very best we can involves, some stuff that's the lessons learned and all the kinds of things. Like, this is what we do in our work anyway, and it's pretty easy to transfer that over to adventure racing, and and vice versa. Actually, I mean, as I'm sure everybody talks about, the lessons you pull from adventure racing back into life, it goes both directions. But we were good at that. And we realized there's only so fast I'll ever run and, or bike or whatever. But let's try and do some of those other putting on our shoes faster things.
So you mentioned longer races. So after you did the 24 race and you did the Raid the Hammer and you were 44th out of 82, what was your race trajectory like? What big races did you get into? How expansive has your racing history gone?
In the early days, Raid the North was still a big race series in Canada. And so that was the thing. And there would be 5 or 6 of those in a year. And they were wilderness traversy races, 24 to 30 hours. So we would sign up for those. And once a year, they would have a 2.5 to 3 day version. So we would sign up for those for a few years. So that was kind of our big thing. And then they also had an 8-hour series. So we built our summers around that for a few years. They also had winter adventure races with ski, snowshoe, and bike. And I mean, we're also cross-country skiers and snowshoers. So we really loved those ones. Probably the best race performance of my life was a winter adventure race solo effort. So I always look back on that. But so we did that.
Hold on. Say more about that. You can't say it was your best ever. What was the race and how did you do?
Well, it's a really long time ago, but it was, there were an awful lot of us solo. And a lot of top racers, a lot of navigation, skiing, snowshoeing, that kind of thing. And I think I ended up 30 seconds out of first behind the top guy, who's a guy who has climbed Everest. So I felt pretty good about that. And there were a lot of people, and it was navigation. It was just that was your secret sauce that you're now you. And they also were navigators, but it is easier to run passing. And I think part of the other thing is when it's a snowshoe, some of it is a snowshoe race, you can follow tracks really quickly. Yeah. And once again, it was one of those where, I'm slower, so I didn't necessarily follow the tracks. I pause and look at my compass. And I think there was some major, like where one of the winning guys went the wrong way first and people followed those tracks. And I still don't really know how it all happened. To be honest, I don't.
When you finished, were you surprised? Were you like, where's everybody else? Like, you're looking around the finish line like, wait a minute.
Well, I knew well before the finish line because they would say like, wow, like, you're the first person through. And then one guy did go by. But and also there were some cool things. Like I carried along like little crampons I could put on my feet just rather than snowshoes for certain parts and, that kind of thing. So anyway, I mean, it's almost 20 years ago now. But whenever I think of the best race I ever had, that was it.
The win is a win.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess it was a top female, but anyway, but I really wanted that guy, the Everest climber. At that point, it was so close. But after that, I was invited in 2005. So 3 years in, I was invited by a team that I considered out of my league to go and do Appalachian Extreme, which was, I think, a 5-day race. So that was the first step into expedition. And we made it a lot of the way, but we did not make it all the way to the end. And that was fun. And they were also spreadsheet people. So I felt very comfortable. I got my list of, my marching.
That was 19 years ago. So we're outside the statute of limitations. What happened? Why didn't it go well? Where did it fall apart?
It went pretty well. Just at the end, we ended up on, a road that's above the road you think you're on in the middle of the woods. And, it happens.
Gotcha. So, just a bad gaff thing late in the race and next thing.
Exactly. We had a wonderful time. And let's see. And then after that, possibly my other race that I'm most proud of would be Untamed New England 2010. And it was the same situation. And those guys also very much out of my league, to the point where they made it pretty clear they were going to check with every other woman in North America first.
Oh, no.
Not quite. I teased them about it. Some of them are still in the sport now. But anyway, and I understood. I would have done the exact same thing if I were them.
When they called you, invite you, you kind of like, it's me. Like, you should. Like it's
no, yeah, it's like, yeah, I think you got dialed the wrong number because there's no way I could go with your team. Right. Anyway, James Gallipo. He's one of the guys on the team. He was not the one who told me that, but anyway, it was kind of
not at all.
No. And honestly, I love them all. I mean, but I had to laugh because it's like, it's true, right? You should call a whole bunch of other people first because I'm just going to slow you down. Yeah. Anyway,
I got a phone call one time. So it says, you want to race with us? And I was like, oh God, I'd love to. But trust me, I know how this is going to go. I'm like, give this guy a call. They were like, hey, thanks. I said, have a great race. And they did really well. But like, you just got to know yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly. I was just being honest. And they were just, they were at the point where they had to find somebody. So anyway, I went with them and we had an awesome race. And I even had the map in my hands sometimes. So we got fourth. But I still it was mind-blowing for me. And one of the things that was mind-blowing was the way you could just step into a team like that and just how well everything worked.
So why did that happen? Like, why do you think, when you look back on it, because the team aspect of adventure racing is what fascinates me, right? It's a team sport, and there are people that step in and it's great, and they step in and it's a disaster. When you look back on it, what made it great for you guys?
I knew two of them very well.
Gotcha.
I'd say, and James in particular, he wrote a long email explaining how he would race. Like, I will always be the last person, in line. And when you're riding ahead of me, you do not ever need to think about me being behind because it's my job to avoid you if you change your line and, that kind of thing. So it was great. So
he clearly outlined the relationship prior to engagement.
Yeah, as soon as we knew I was going to race, he wrote this long, very lovely, it was like super, okay, I can picture exactly how this is going to be. And he said, sometimes maybe we'll just hook up on a tow line just because mentally, even if we're walking, it'll just keep us together and it'll keep us part of it. Right. And so he did a fantastic job. I was never at the end feeling alone, like I was chasing these much better athletes. Yeah. I always felt part of the team. So that was cool. The captain of the team, Harper Forbes, he's a close friend and he's a good navigator. And we'd been guess that was before we went on our Moab mountain bike trip with his family. But in any case, we, I knew him and his navigation skills, and there was a lot of, just as like the way that they plan gear, they had done so many races and so many long races that there wasn't any drama.
Gotcha.
It was just, here's what we're going to do, and we're going to get there. And when we can run, we'll run. And actually, I found that in that race, probably more than most other races, because I felt bad that I was, the least qualified on the team. I would try to start running like at times that I probably wouldn't have on my own team, and learned, I actually can do a little bit more than I thought I could.
Well, it's interesting, right? How the idea of being aspirational, like being with a team just a bit better than you.
Oh, a lot better than me.
A lot better than you, right? Right. Noted that it got you to increase your output in a desire to keep up with them. Whereas with a different team, you may have not have done that, right? So so there's a whole psychological component there.
With my own team, I had the power to hold back. It's like the central governor, right? They talk about the central governor theory, right? And you kind of go, okay, this is as fast as I'm going to go. And then on this team, it's like, sometimes I want to be the person to say, why don't we run? Because I don't want, and it was like, maybe I actually can. And there's a very famous video, actually, Randy took from that race that he reposts once every year or two at the very end. Were you in that race on Thames New England 2010?
Not 2010, no.
It finished with a Rogaine, like you got to the ski resort, and that was it could be your finish line, but if you had enough time, there were these checkpoints, and they were pretty far away, and you could get a few more and get some bonus points. Anyway, we were out there, and I believed we had time for one more. And the rest of the team wasn't so sure, and Randy's there. And he recorded the whole thing. And I still look back. I'm always embarrassed whenever I see it. But anyway, my big line was, well, I'll tell you what, if I was by myself, I'd go get it.
You're laying it down.
I'm 5 days in, right? I haven't slept.
Right.
None of us have slept. We're all kind of like little babies in diapers.
Right.
Anyway, so that was my line. It's like, anyway, as soon as I said that, everybody looked at each other. Let's go. And we got it, and we got back. And their point, and it was fair, it was a lot of work, and chances were that it wouldn't change our ranking. But the hope was, of course, that maybe one of the other teams would overextend because, we'd had the penalty. Maybe this will, launch us into third if somebody makes a mistake.
Right. And to your point, it's better to have gone for that point and stayed in fourth than not to gone for it and realized that would have put you in the third. That would have been the killer.
Well, yeah. So you should have been on the team, Brian. But no, anyway, in the end, we reached the decision, and it did not make the difference in the end. So, they were right, but I was right. But anytime I see the video, I blush still after.
Well, now that you've just told tens of thousands of people about it, it's going to show up again.
Absolutely.
Yes. So another thing too, you mentioned there, I think it's just worth going back and highlighting for the newer racers listening to the show. You highlighted something really important there about the idea of team dynamics when you're moving. And you see from time to time how you would all kind of go on tow just to keep that physical connection to each other. Because I've seen it on teams. I've experienced it on teams. It's amazing how teams disintegrate when they get further and further and further apart on a trek. And then especially if the lead person is so far ahead that they're waiting. And then when the last person catches up, and then they repeat that cycle.
Yeah.
And it doesn't serve to motivate the person in last.
Yes.
Right. It doesn't. And so I think the strategy that a lot of teams use, and I'm curious if you think I'm saying this right, is you take the person who is the slowest and you put them in second. And when there's someone behind you, that person tends to go quicker. I've seen that myself. I did an Adirondack trip one time with Eric Carvalho, who's this amazing athlete, right? And I'm nowhere near where he is. And I found that during the trekking section of this great pack rafting trip we took in the Adirondacks, it was great, that when I fell behind him, he dropped me. He dusted me. But when I was with him, our average speed was higher.
Yeah.
That's where you put your teammates.
Yeah, no, you're on to something. And I think just mentally, it is really hard to be the person falling off the end, because I've been in that position. Absolutely. Yeah. And, sometimes you just give up. You go, okay, well,
you just disintegrate. You're like, what am I doing out here? And
I'm going to walk even slower.
Yeah.
I've had it. And and with that race, I knew going in, James would always be behind me. And that was awesome. And
And it's great that he said that in advance.
Yeah.
Because it took the pressure off you. Do I have to keep up with these guys?
Correct. And it also didn't make me think it was a decision he made on the fly after seeing how unfit I was, which would have also hurt. I mean,
where you say to yourself, I'm doing so poorly here that I'm making this poor guy wait behind me.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah. So no, it was great. That was just so much fun and so inspirational. And I knew it would never happen again. So I tried a couple of expedition races, pulling together teams for other countries. We went to the Apex race in Switzerland in 2011, I think it was. And Tierra Viva in Argentina in 2013. And different combinations of people. One of them was a member of my old team. He came to both. But I'd say in general, because it was difficult to find people to go to these, I mean, it wasn't that anybody was a bad teammate. We just weren't a team. We hadn't coalesced as a team. And in both cases, there were fun aspects to it, but, we didn't really do as well.
It all kind of coalesces. It never really comes together.
We didn't really know how to work together, and maybe if we had done it a few more times, we would have done better. But in each case, I mean, I got to see some beautiful places, and we had a lot of fun, and we met a lot of amazing people. But I think I was trying to recreate Untamed New England 2010, and part of the reason that was so amazing is I was racing out of my league. With racers who were out of my league, and you only, you're lucky to get that once in your lifetime. So that was awesome. So that was an amazing memory. After that, I switched over to ultra running, and I still do adventure races, like we have winter adventure races, especially in Canada, and we've got 8 hours. So I still participate in the ones that are close. I don't tend to travel to adventure races, like where I have to go stay in a hotel, like, in another province or something like that. If they're not in Ontario, I don't tend to go. But ultra running was fun because I didn't have to find a teammate. So it was taking a lot of the skills, the spreadsheets, the running, the looking at maps and all of that kind of thing, and figuring out how to train. But I only had to worry about me.
Exactly.
So, so that was kind of what I did from I guess my first one was in 2010, and my last one was in 2019, just before the pandemic. And then my Achilles, just before the pandemic, said, yeah, you know what? I think you need healthcare. And then they shut down everything. And I didn't go for a year and a half to, get much done to it. So I do much shorter runs now.
So inside that 9-year ultra running arc of your athleticism, what are some of the races that you did?
Well, the Canadian Death Race might have one of the best names.
Okay.
It's 100.
They say what it is, right?
It's 100.
I actually did joke. Jen Seger, who was on the show, I joked with her that the Canadians are the nicest people in the world, but their race names are the most terrifying names in the world. I like that about the country. So the Canadian Death Race, obviously, it didn't live up to its name for you. How was that race?
It was great. The goal was to go to Ultra Trail Mont Blanc before they became jerks, now.
Yeah. I'm sure I talk about, UTMB. What happened with them? What's your take on that?
I guess money, and Ironman came in.
Yeah.
And, some of their events are probably still great, but at the time I was looking at it, they hadn't tried to take over the world, and it still seemed like a nice, pure goal to have. Now I know there's a lot of feeling that you shouldn't do their races.
They kind of jumped the shark a little bit too corporate. Well, they were very tough on Whistler, weren't they? Didn't they put a race out of business up in Whistler?
Yes, they did. Yeah. Gary Robbins, and we all love Gary Robbins. Everybody saw him at the Barclay and in the movie, all that kind of thing. But I was signed up for that race in 2020. But my Achilles, I had didn't go and do that. But they didn't give him a license or permissions to come back. And then they gave permissions to this new race by UTMB, and they're advertising it now. And the comments on social media, like they've had to take down some of their ads and repost them because people are all like putting angry emojis on them and, making comments. So it's a real shame. that it went that way. Anyway, but that was my goal. Back then in 2010, it was a legit dream to go to UTMB and run around Mont Blanc, and it sounded really cool. So you had to earn points by going to races, and we had a number of us who wanted to do it. There were about 8 or 9 friends who were interested in this. So it was fun because it gave us an excuse to go do races, in the northern US and, around Canada to earn our points. And you had to earn them within a period of time, go in the lottery. So the Canadian Death Race in 2012 was
what was the distance on that race? How long was it?
125K.
Okay.
And you had to finish it in 24 hours. There's a lot of mountains. What I loved about it is that during the day, there was a section with a lot of bears that I think they were grizzlies in that area. Anyway, they took the trouble to go out with helicopters and scare them away from the lead runners. But then it got dark when they're so scared.
We have to protect the podium. The podium needs to be full.
Exactly. They couldn't have helicopters in the dark. So we ran, through there. So I remember taking my trekking poles and banging them on trees and that sort of thing. And one of my friends who was more of a lead runner, he did see a bear, probably being scared by a helicopter. Yeah. But, that was pretty cool. So that
the helicopter pushes the bear right into him, right? Saves the
That's right. So I think that may have been my first ultra run through the night, which I love. And if I can get back to it, I wouldn't mind doing some more of those, but I would have to find ones with pretty generous cutoffs. I couldn't do that one again. But I won my age group, which, threw me off because I'm not an athlete. But then it was like, but a lot of that is outdoor skills and adventure racing skills. Like one thing I find adventure racing helped me, like they have these generous aid stations, and depending on which race you're in, they might have quesadillas. I've been offered a margarita, there's, and I would often just carry my own water and run past an aid station with my little whatever, the things that I like to eat that I already know that I can carry for 20 hours. And I would save a lot of time. I would pass people that way. So I found that adventure racing was a tremendous background.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I got you prepped the idea like our job is to move forward. We can't spend time here because, they always say in ultra, the aid stations, there's this interesting culture in ultras, and I've run a couple, that the aid stations try to outdo each other.
Yes.
Right. And they get increasingly, and there's a fire and there's s'mores. Oh, sit down. And it's called pillow rock, right? Like don't wash up on pillow rock. And to your point, because you're an adventure racer, you're like, nope, sorry, spreadsheet says I have 30 seconds. I'm going.
Yeah, not allowed.
Right, and off you run. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
And I don't mind carrying water. And some people are like, well, I'm only going to carry 200 milliliters of water because there's an aid station. It's like, I don't know. I'm going to be climbing mountains. Like if I carry 1.5 liters, I don't think, it's not like I'm, Killian or anything. I'm going to get up there.
Well, what does carrying more water really do to you? Like it makes you better in the mountains. It's not going to kill you to carry that much more water.
Exactly. You're never stressed if you've got your water and food with you about, whether the aid station was actually at the correct mile they marked on the map, that kind of thing. So I went from there and then I tried UTMB and I went in like with ridiculous confidence looking back on it, like, oh, yeah, I'm not. I mean, also, to be fair, because people say, like, aren't you nervous? And it's like, well, what's going to happen? Like, they're not going to shoot me if I don't finish. Right. Like, it's just, I'm going to try it. But I did believe I was going to do it. I did not. I missed a cutoff at about 95K, and it's 168K, I think. But I had a lovely time, met a nice fellow who was also going to be cut off, and we chit-chatted all the way down, and he was an adventure racer too. And, he's from Denmark. We're Facebook friends now,
Yeah. And to your point, I mean, no one wants to scratch out of a race, but at least it wasn't like 150K.
Well, no.
It was like, it was so close to, it was at 95. You're like, this was a good effort, good day out here, but I'm going to call it. Like, I'm good here.
The next year I got back in again. I was so lucky, and I did 3/4 of it. And actually I was ahead of the cutoffs, but I was dangerously tired. And we were on trails where there were cliffs, and there was a spot where I fell asleep on my feet while walking along up a hill and woke up on the other side of the trail and couldn't remember how I got there. And I decided to stop because of that. Looking back, I regret that. I regret that I didn't stop and just try harder. I did stop and try to nap for a little while, but it was super cold. It was night, and I was in a different country from where my hotel was. Right. And there was this thought that, well, unfortunately, it was convenient to drop there because I knew where the bus would be and it would take me back. And maybe if it had happened somewhere else, it would have been better, because then I would have been forced. It's like, I have no idea how I'm getting back to Chamonix, so I might as well just curl up and sleep behind this tree and hope it turns out. But I made it, I think, 120 odd kilometers that time. And anyway, after that, I had seen a fair amount. Like, it's, you're running around Mont Blanc. Mm-hmm. So I had seen now 3/4 of it. So there's another race they have where you start down at the bottom part and you run a little farther. They had an extra mountain, but you get to see the rest of it. Right. And it was, I think, 106K, I think they called it, the CCC at UTMB. So I spent a few years and I wasn't as successful in the lottery. So I didn't get into it until 2019. And I went and I finished the damn thing. And I have now seen the whole route around Mont Blanc, and I actually saw parts in daylight that I didn't see in daylight before. So it's all good.
So you patched it all together. Right?
I did, but it wasn't what I hoped. But in between, I had some cool things. So I did the Eiger Ultra Trail in Switzerland, which is
that's gotta be beautiful. I heard that's like a beautiful race.
Yeah, it's like it sounds. That was beautiful. Lavaredo Ultra Trail up in the Dolomites. That's another one. I think it's 119K. So these were all because I had to maintain my points to stay in the lottery for UTMB. Ultra Tour Monte Rosa, which is actually like you go past the Matterhorn, and it's as long as UTMB, but we could do it as 4-day stages. So basically marathons with, 3,000 meters of climb on trails and then go sleep in a hotel and they give you meals at night. So that was pretty awesome. So I always look back on it and I say, well, like the original dream, the running around Mont Blanc, it didn't quite happen that way. But it was 10 years of amazing adventures. And a lot of times there were other friends who went with me. And my husband went to most of these races. He tends to run shorter distances because he's fast but pukes. So,
it happens.
In hot weather. But, he would do pretty well, like place, in the top 5% of his age group. But he wouldn't want dinner that night. And there's my superpower. I'm always able to eat. Always.
Always have a good stomach.
Exactly. And that is probably, it's not something, I don't know if it's something you can develop, but I always laugh. That was my superpower. He can run fast. And if somebody were to hand me a hamburger after 80K on a hot day, I'd go, yum, hamburger, eat it. And keep going.
You and I kind of share that. Like, I think the engine to run is so hot. It's like, give me whatever you want to give me. It goes right in me. And the body clocks, and off I go. And that's just, it's to your point. It's like a superpower. So yeah, I mean, it's good to see I have someone out there that shares it with me. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And it's amazing how helpful that is.
Oh yeah. The ability to put calories in your body late in a race is a great, the only place where I fell apart was I ran the Keys 100 and I had a great time for the first 50 miles and then things fell apart after that. Cause it was like 107 degrees on the course. The mistake I made there was that I overestimated my body's ability to digest food in that heat. I should have shifted to all liquid nutrition. Yeah. I should have just been drinking everything I could. And because you're so hot, all the body fluids are pushed out to the extremities and your stomach just shuts down.
Yeah.
And that was the big lesson for me was I really wish I had packed a cooler full of, Starbucks Frappuccino drinks, like just those cold caffeinated. That's the mistake. And I always tell people, I was at a race one time where a fellow racer was struggling so mightily in the heat, and I had an extra Gatorade in my bin. I said, just put down this Gatorade, and just get those calories in you, get the fluid in you right away. And so to your point, the only time my stomach fails me is in extreme heat. That's the only time I've had that happen to me.
I would agree. Being Canadian, that comes up less often, but when it does come up, it's not that much fun for me either. No.
Yeah, it's tough that way. So you had this adventure race trajectory, which then led into the ultra running. Yeah. But you haven't really left AR behind, right? You're still pretty active in Wilderness Traverse. You mentioned you were part of the orienteering club in your local area. It feels to me like you've kind of kept your toes in the AR world while you've done all these other things too.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I started on the Orienteering Ontario board in 2008 and stayed on it till 2023. So I've been pretty involved in managing the sport now in the province for 15 years and just recently stepped off. And one of the things we're in the process of doing is moving. We've got a chalet up near Georgian Bay, and that is our plan, is to move up there and make it our full-time home. So in anticipation of that, last year, Bob Miller and I got a few friends together, set up a steering committee, and we've started some orienteering up there. Because when I get there better be orienteering.
Right.
So we figured we'd get going on that. And, I've been learning a bit about mapping. And so that's something that, I'm still involved. I mean, even when I stepped off the board, I agreed to stay on 3 or 4 subcommittees and help write the newsletter and, that kind of thing. It's just, I don't sit on the at the board meetings anymore. It gives me more.
You play a volunteer role. You're still there, but you're not deeply involved in the board, which is good because 15 years is a long time to be on a board.
It is. You get stale. And my interest now is more in getting this new group going up near Georgian Bay. And I'd like to spend more time on, it's everything. You've got websites and registration and what are we going to do about maps? There's a 25-year-old map where our chalet is. That's great. And it's not bad, but, how do I learn how to improve it? So it's kind of cool because I love learning new things. And so there's all of that. And we've got a lot of adventure racers who have kind of ended up in the Collingwood Blue Mountains area, like Bob and, many other people actually. Either they weekend there or they've actually moved their families up there. So we've got a great base. Scott Ford, who did Eco Challenge with Bob Miller most recently. And I think he also was there 20 years ago on a different team, but, he's also there. So we've got a really strong community. So we want to try to get a bit more orienteering and navigation type activities, whether they're adventure racing, adventure running, or orienteering. We don't really care what the label is. Like we had a ski-o and a snowshoe-o this winter. And we want to have a mountain bike one this fall. So we just want to get people with maps in their hands. And we encourage them to do, like Bob's managing a bunch of events. So I guess that's one of the main things people probably would think of me as doing would be wilderness traverse. Like back in 2010, when Bob started Wilderness Traverse, I already had a race in Scotland that weekend, so couldn't go. So I asked if there was anything I could do to help. And it ended up, I went course testing with him. And that was another one of those super cool experiences, like I'm never going to race with Bob Miller.
Well, and to that point, I will tell you, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I always tell people if they're adventure race adjacent, right? If they're in the sport and if they're working on their skills, a really great way to skill up is to volunteer at a race that is beyond your capacity.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to avoid your current capacity, because by dipping your toe into the water, by being involved in the course scouting, by helping with the volunteering, by working in aid station or a TA, you get pulled into the quality of the event along the way. And so to your point, the Bob Miller, Barbara mix kind of gave you a dose of what that would be like with necessarily racing the course.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would have. If we were home, it was very much a Raid the North kind of course. Oh, okay. So it's a race that 100% we would have signed up for, except we had a 24-hour race in Scotland the same weekend. So I wanted to be part of it. So right. I got to go out and course test. But I mean, to your point, you're right. I mean, absolutely right. But anyway, so I went out with him and it was like, wow, so this is really interesting, because you sort of imagine this guy you saw on TV and, how he might race and, right. How he might make navigation decisions. And he'd give me a map and, we'd take turns and, I learned a lot of things. So that was very cool. And then 2011 came along. Well, that was the year that I had told him, like, of course I'm going to race in 2011. But then as I got thinking about it, it's like, I don't know, like, I mean, there's other races, like maybe I'll help him this time again. Right. And so for about 2 or 3, maybe 4 years, each year it was a decision. Am I going to race? Am I going to help? And I finally thought, you know what, let's make it easier for him to plan and for me to plan. And I'll just say this is not one of the races that I do. This is one of the races that I will always volunteer for. And then you can count on, and I don't always course test. I do pretty much always sit in headquarters, though, doing the race tracking, and like the tracker system is kind of the biggest thing that I'm in charge of over the weekend.
So you mentioned before how Wilderness Traverse is the de facto championship for Canada. It's turned into that.
I would say it was. Now that we have things like Expedition Canada and some of the race. Yeah, but I would say for a long time, until a few years ago, I think most people would have agreed it was kind of the de facto adventure race Canadian championship.
Right, and
now I don't know.
Legendary. It's been a big. I tell you, like I live about 7 or 8 hours south of it, and it's always a common conversation. And I was actually supposed to be there several years ago. An injury got in the way, and all of that.
Yeah.
Now, for the folks who are new to Wilderness Traverse, walk us through the race itself, because there's canoe involved, there's portaging, tell us a bit about the race. Tell us about the race.
Okay, well, it's the disciplines are trekking/running, mountain biking, and canoeing. And because it's in Ontario, we have to do portaging.
Right. I'd say portage.
You can portage where you live.
Your fancy Canadian words. Cool, portage.
That's right. And I would say that typically the canoeing, and it's real canoes, like, hard canoes, like no pack rafts or anything like that. Not whitewater, usually flat water, sometimes rivers. But yeah, I mean, portaging usually plays a role. And sometimes they're even like portages that aren't like trails. We've had some where it's sort of relatively open, terrain with some trees, and you just have to make your way to another lake, which is one of those things.
You better carry that. You don't dare drag it, right? That's
correct. 100%. Yeah, because we know which canoe you took, and if there's damage, we're going to. Yes. So, I mean, the canoeing, it's different every year. The nature of it is very different, but I'd say it's a real paddle. Usually, like it's a paddle you would do for fun. And these days, when I'm busy with a lot of other things, that's the course test that I usually beg to be, be sure you plan that on a day. Right. Yeah, make sure that's a day I can go. I love the canoeing, mountain biking, and it can be a mix of ATV and snowmobile trails, some cottage roads, some that kind of thing. Is it 24 or 30 hours? We always say 24 to 30 hours. Like 30 is when we cut people off.
Got it.
But, for the winter, often the winter is in 20 hours, 19, 18, that kind of thing. And we have 3 versions. Make sure I get this right. Is it the Expedition, the Explorers, and the Challenge course? So they're like, if you miss a cutoff, then you go from the Expedition course to the Explorers course and so on. So there's 3 different ways to get a full race finish. The trekking is usually pretty challenging. Bob likes a good navigation course. I would say one thing, and it doesn't always appeal to the Americans. We really like it to be a journey, and there's not a ton of checkpoints.
Right.
So the checkpoints are often to keep you, from going in a dangerous place or around private land.
Right. They kind of force you on a route.
Well, no, not really. No, I would say like when there are, I guess, yes, in that small area. But then I would say between the checkpoints, like I remember one year an American team came up and we were really proud. We had 7 checkpoints in 24 to 30 hours. And we thought, and that includes transitions. And we probably had, discipline, probably 4 different lakes on that race. So we were just thinking this is our best work yet. And that was one of the pieces of feedback we got from a US team, because often, you get dozens of checkpoints and optional checkpoints, and it's just a different philosophy. Yeah. Whereas for us, to us, it's a huge success if we kind of look at the map and go, okay, there's no reason for us to force them in any particular direction here, but we'll have them get to that marina. That's 8 kilometers away, and there's multiple ways to get there, and there's no checkpoints in between to steer you. So you have, the sky's the limit. How are you going to do this? And that's as much as possible, we try to do that. I mean, you're always going to have areas where it's pretty clear this is the ATV trail that you're going to have to ride, or whatever. But the treks especially, it can be difficult. And I remember when I first was learning, I remember people like Bob and some of the top adventure racers 20 years ago just saying, if you can navigate in Ontario, you can navigate anywhere, because there's nothing to see. Yeah. It's just, there's this forest. There aren't mountains.
Right. I heard there's no big features. I heard you have to, it's hard. I think that's the one thing, the feedback I've gotten on WT is that it's a proper race in that regard, that you had to be on your navigation game. You had to be on your fitness game. It calls upon every single one of the different dimensions of adventure racing. It calls upon.
Yeah, you really have to be on your game, because, so you arrive at a lake. You're always going to arrive at a lake in Ontario. Right. And so, I know from having been on the other side of it, it's hard, and you can get confused, and you can be staring at shapes of lakes, and at night you can't do that. And, I've certainly messed up, when I've been racing. But yeah, so it's a fun race. We usually get about 60 teams, 3 or 4. We get some of the top racers in the country always come, and we have a really good battle at the top. But we also have a rookie category, which is a team where nobody on it has finished a 24-hour race. And that's really cool.
Well, that's a fun category.
It's a very fun category because they're so thrilled when they finish. And there's often rookie teams that surprise us. Last year, the most surprising one was a team, like our definition of a junior team is one person on the team is under 18. That's all you need, and you're a junior team. They were all under 18. And all of us at HQ, they were either parents or, women of my age or whatever. And we all saw these young boys come in and we all went, oh. Like, when are we going to have to send the car for them? And,
these poor little things.
They don't know what they're getting into. And I mean, can they even stay up all night? Oh my gosh, they crushed it. They finished halfway through the pack. They were disappointed. They didn't get the longest course, the expedition course, but they got the explorer course. And at the finish line, one of the kids' mums and grandparents, like they were all there. And we've never had that before. You don't get many grandparents at a finish line. So yeah. So, I mean, it's really fun. Just finishing it is huge. There's a lot of people, just like, 20 years ago when my goal was finish second last. We get people like that, and we get people at the front, and we had people minutes apart, going on to the final leg this year.
And that's the great thing about the sport. And this isn't just adventure racing, which let's be clear, it's for other sports too. But the fact that it's such a big tent, right?
Yes.
You have teams that come out there that can just crush it and kill it, and they blow through the transitions, and they're pointy end of the race. And then there's that middle pack and the back of the pack. They're just having a blast. They're having such a good time, and they're just really, really enjoying themselves. It reminds me of the Dirtbag Diaries is one of my favorite podcasts.
Me too. They do a great job.
And Fitzcahall, and there's no doubt in my mind that the Dark Zone is a descendant, if you will, to honor that. They got me into this. And they did an episode called about what is hardcore, right? And it was a really good episode. I'll put the link in the show notes. And they talk about how this guy's climbing, and he's climbing really fast, and he's passing by all these other climbers that are just so worked, and they're so beat up, and they're so tired, and they're so destroyed, and they're having such a great time. Like, for them, it's not like about getting to the top of the mountain fastest. It's not about hitting every single crag and doing it, but being out there and just having a blast with their friends. And when they get there, they get there. And and you mentioned that. I think about, like, in so many adventure races, we know there are teams that they know they're not going to win. They know that, but they just have so much fun when they're out there. The navigation, the teammate, and the fact that they turn their world into this 24-hour bubble of just them and their mates, and they're going to go race.
Yep. And I would say the other thing that we have at Wilderness Traverse that's amazing is we get an awful lot of really experienced adventure racers and athletes who come and volunteer. We've got some people who are also just amazing volunteers who come year after year to the point where they're experts at it. But we often, like, you'll come into a TA, like I already know the 3-time defending champion has signed up with his young daughter, and they're going to come and work at a canoe TA this year rather than defending his title. He kind of figures it's time to move on. And like my husband and a couple of other friends and his 12-year-old, they're going to be out at a canoe campsite. And the volunteers all bring their own twist. Some of them will have a bonfire, and they'll, have music. My husband, he likes to feed people. He's the chef in our household. And so he's always there worrying beforehand about, like, okay, I need some hot chocolate and some coffee and maybe some chicken soup broth. And I laugh because, like, I'm mostly behind the scenes now. We used to teach people how to use trackers. We don't have to do that anymore. You just write instructions. Most people know. So I don't have to do a little meeting with each team and explain it all. So I'm in the back room, but everybody, like, they'll come up to us and they go, you gave me soup at 2 a.m. And it was like, so he's the famous one.
There was a NYRA, New York Adventure Racing Association, just had the longest day. They were racing. It was miserable and it was pouring rain. And one of the racers, Kate Matthews, made a whole slew of kiwi, she's in New Zealand, of kiwi pies before the race that she gave to the race director to have at the TA.
Oh, wow.
She did the race. And so you pass through, and so the racers are making food for the TAs, and it's just that volunteer spirit all just coming together that way.
Yeah, it feels like a big family. I mean, it's the same. And like for a while, we were using Grant's GPS tracking systems. So I ended up at headquarters of the 2018 Untamed New England, sort of as a trade-off, because Grant was a tremendous help to us with Wilderness Traverse. Even after he stopped doing that as a company, he kept his software going, and used it with us for another couple of years, which was awesome. But yeah, that was cool because that's where I met an awful lot of the American adventure racers.
Well, that was my first expedition race. I remember meeting you there in 2018, and the famous story of how you and Michelle were in the tracking room, and you were watching myself and my teammate, our tracker, as it slowly left the race map. And the rumor was, and you could confirm this or not, that you were yelling at the tracker, like, no, as we slowly just peeled off the race course.
We often do yell at trackers. Yes, I can't remember if I yelled at yours, to be honest. It's funny. I was interviewed for a magazine article last week, and she was saying, I just want to hear all the anecdotes from last year's Wilderness Traverse. And I'm thinking, like, I get maybe, if I'm lucky, an hour and a half of sleep over 50 hours.
It's all a blur.
And and everything I do is problem. Like the things that come to me are like this, not that, I mean, I get to see the fun stuff happening, but it's more like, okay, we need more water here. The truck didn't arrive in time. We need to, like, we're missing a gear, but like those are the kinds of things, or somebody needs a ride out.
Yeah. And I say this all the time on the show, and I think I'm trying to bring this to life by talking about it all the time. I think it's fascinating to watch, like, the eco challenges and the cover of the races and all that stuff. I argue that a really fascinating documentary would be to embed yourself in a 5-day adventure race and watch the organization and the volunteers.
I agree.
That would be Stefan Muller, when he talked about Expedition Africa, the world champs. He says that that's where the real stories are, at the teams and the journalists and the media, and like what goes wrong, like, get this over there. We've lost these bikes. We have to move this. That's the real. And I think that's a part too. And I'm so glad we're talking about it too, right? Because so much of the Dark Zone is about the racing, right? That's the core of the podcast. But I really argue that for so many listeners, I really encourage you to embed yourself, to take part in that kind of an adventure, whether it be a 5-day race or a 24-hour race, and be part of seeing what happens there. Because you just see people, and you qualify in this category, Barbara, they just love being a part of something that's bigger than themselves, and then giving people these great experiences along the way.
Absolutely. It is so rewarding to see how much people enjoy it. And it is, I mean, it's a bit addictive to solve constant problems, right? Yes. I mean, if that's your thing. Right. And, I'd say the people who end up in those roles tend to sort of, it's like it's fun. It's fun being able to get this sorted, and you're working with a lot of competent people who also can do that. And they're fun people also. Yeah. And then somebody maybe at 3 a.m. hands you one slice of pizza, and you would do anything for them for the rest of their lives because they're wonderful, or coffee. One guy came and brought us an espresso maker to headquarters. I'll never forget Kyle.
We love you, Kyle. We know you're out there. But how about this? How about and we've all seen this, the mid-race pep talk where a volunteer helps get a team back on the course?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of thing my husband and my other friend, Tim, they do that out all the time, getting people like, okay, like, why don't you just sit here around the fire for a few minutes? We'll give you some coffee. You've still got, this much time. You can do this. You can get down to the road. Yes. Volunteers are the best because you get in your head, when you're on the race course, you get in your head, like, we must be the very last people. Nobody's anywhere close to us. Yeah. We suck. Yeah. And then you get there and you find out, oh, there's 4 other teams around the campfire, or the last team just left a few minutes ago, or whatever. And the volunteers bring you back to earth. You're not that bad at all. That's awesome. And I actually I don't know why. I looked back at Untamed New England today because I was trying to remember what year it was. And I had just written down this list of like my favorite problems we had to solve. And this, I think, is still my favorite of my whole time in 15 years of volunteering for adventure racing. But we got a phone call from a stranger who needed to reach a racer to get his Shopify password, or they would lose $20,000 by the end of the business day. We're there, like looking at the map and going, this feels very important. On the other hand, it's not life and death. We're really more here for life and death. At the same time, $20,000 is $20,000. What's the best way? So, I mean, that was.
Well, you can imagine like day 3 of a race, they call headquarters, need your Shopify password? My what? Like, I'd be like, what are you talking about? And I give it to you. Okay, Barbara.
I think that was how it started, actually, was like, I'm not sure what my Shopify password is. I think the problem was solved. I don't think they lost $20,000, but I look back on that and I kind of think that it sort of exemplifies the variety of problems you get when you're at HQ.
I think one of the most fun things you all did back in 2018 was, if you remember, at the very, very end of the race, there was terrible weather. That's not what I'm talking about.
I remember.
Right, but back up a little bit more. If you remember, the night before, we had the gold bricks, and you told us all to get off the course because the bad weather came in. And I remember there were 2 stories that I remember. We talked about it after the race. One was that one team had taken refuge in a police station. I'd said to the police, we're these racers, and we have to get off the course. And the police actually, this is might be a religion or rumor. The police let them sleep in the lobby of the police station and got a call and said, "Listen, you guys behave yourselves. We got to go." And they left the adventure racers in charge of the police station. I remember that. And the second story I remember was, this was at the banquet. We mentioned this at the end, that a team had taken refuge off the course, and none of you quite knew where they were. So you looked at the Google Street View, and they were in a motel. They rented a room in a motel, and you showed the screenshot from the Street View where they had gone. Just the race had just gone crazy, and it was just people everywhere, and all those great stories.
That's funny. I remember the police station. I didn't remember they went out on a call, but I remember they were sleeping at a police station. And we actually, more often than you would imagine, look at Google Street View to figure out what's going on. As you see a dot stop and you go where are they? What, and they you go, oh, and sometimes there's an explanation. Oh, that's a restaurant, or something like that. So yeah, that race, that was amazing. I had a wonderful time, and Grant was just such a wonderful host. I had to travel down there, and I was working with 4 amazing, race director type people from the US, and actually, I guess from the UK also. And it was a fabulous experience. I mean, they locked us in a police station. Grant was brilliant. One of the things about headquarters at an adventure race is there's a tendency for folks to drift in and hang out, and it makes it hard for them to do all the things they're supposed to do. So Grant took the bull by the horns. He rented us a conference room in a police station, and you had to get by.
Right, you buzzed in.
You had to get by a police officer if you were going to come see us. So people never drifted in. Grant came in, not too many other people.
Right. Yeah. Meanwhile, you're locked in there. You can't get out. You're knocking on the door. Nope, you got to work.
That was most of my time. Although he also rented us fantastic accommodations in B&Bs, which I spent very little time in, but I have to say he treated me like a queen when I went down there. So
let me ask, and first off, you've been very kind with your time, and I want to be thoughtful about your schedule. So I don't want to belabor these questions. You could go on all night and keep talking about it. And by the way, audience, for the record, Barbara told me when scheduling this interview, what will I be able to talk about? Just for the record, that's one thing that she said to me before we got together, and I knew it would go fine. You've been involved in orienteering Ontario, and you're making all this stuff. Do you see yourself getting back into the 5-day racing, not as a racer, but as somebody who would spend their time organizing, spending the entire week? Would you take a week of your own time to go get involved in that again, to relive those experiences?
If I can, if I have the time, I'd be totally happy to go and be involved. I mean, especially because I've got, at this point, since 2010 or 2011, I've been involved in tracking. So I've probably got in North America, I mean, obviously there's Mark Harris, but, I'm one of the people who's done an awful lot of adventure race tracking. So I could probably go and help a race like I did with Untamed New England again. I wouldn't mind just going and sitting at a canoe campsite, the fun people get to do sometime.
Right.
No, I would totally do that. We're kind of since the pandemic started, there's been a lot of adulting. My husband is a dentist, and, there was just, it wasn't an easy few years, and we're now in the process. He's sold the practice. He's working a little less, and we're working on selling a house. And, there's just
Those
there's
transitions, right?
There's a bunch of, elderly relatives and all those kinds of things. So I'd say the last 5 years, there's been just not enough training to go and do. I mean, I still do the shorter races, but
Well, but that's always the challenge, right? And for the listener too, there's a challenge between we have these demands in our time that are outside of racing, and then there's the racing we want to do, and it's always maximizing that time and not getting down on yourself when you can't do that thing, right? We've all been there. Your Achilles, my own health challenges. Like, you just have to acknowledge the reality of the situation and do what you can to keep moving forward, right? That's what it boils down to. And
exactly.
And the trick is just don't give up. Don't walk away from it.
Yeah, and I think I'm at the stage where I'm looking for what the next challenge is going to be, athletically. I mean, not the organizational stuff. It's hard, but it comes easy at this point because I've done it for so long.
Right.
So and starting the new orienteering club is fun, but then you're usually the one standing there, with the spreadsheet once again while the people run in the woods or whatever. I mean, I shouldn't say that because we do have some other people who set courses, and I get to go run sometimes too, which is wonderful. But yeah, I'd say I'm looking for the next thing that would get me out there training like I used to. Maybe not quite like I used to, but a lot more than I am right now.
Gotcha.
Because right now it's too easy to think of, well, I have to pack this china, so I'm not going to go for a run today. And there's been too many days like that. So I need to kick myself in the butt. I'd say that's kind of where I'm at right now.
And I bet you there's someone at home right now listening to this who could identify with that challenge. And that's why it's good that we're talking about it, right? It's not always TAs and high fives and podiums. It's us finding this constant ongoing, I'm going to use the word battle, strong word to use, ongoing battle to do the things that we love to do in relation to things that we have to do. Right. Yeah. And it's when that Venn diagram connects, that's when things work out really well.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people who are really good at that. I mean, I don't have kids. I mean, what excuse do I have? There's just so many things. So we will work on that. That is the next chapter, that and getting this new orienteering group going and continuing to work in adventure racing as a volunteer and do, some shorter races and actually 24-hour row gains. I would love to do some more of those, but I did a number of those and we did pretty well. And I'd love to do some more of those around the world.
So let me ask the final question as we wrap up here. You're somebody who's been embedded in the sport for a variety of years, doing a lot of different things. You have a megaphone now to the adventure racing world. You're talking to everybody who has a chance to race and listens to the Dark Zone. What do you recommend AR race directors, AR racers, they focus on, they want to get better at when it comes to the sport itself? How do we want to grow? How can we preserve the sport that we love so much? What should we be paying attention to?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I'd say keep it fun, keep different levels available, have options for children to get involved, have, shorter, 3-hour entry level events, things to give people confidence and motivation to try a little more. I mean, none of this is magic. This is what people have been trying for years. I do think encouraging people to do single sport events. And that was actually, once again, that one day with Ian Adamson, that was one of the things he said is go race against the orienteers, go race against the runners, go race against the paddlers, and that will make you a better adventure racer. And I think we could, maybe build that more into our culture. We actually have in Ontario a very healthy relationship between the sports of orienteering and adventure racing, where we look for conflicts in schedule and try to avoid it. And
that's great. You work with each other.
Well, and we actually are each other, right? Because you've got Bob and me starting an orienteering group with some other friends who are also adventure racers, and we've got the latest orienteering club up near Parry Sound. What they're running are basically adventure races, they're 6-hour events, and one of them has paddling and mountain biking in addition to running, but he's a former North American orienteering champion. So we don't separate them out as much as we did when I started. When I started, there was some antagonism between the sport, and I'm not sure if that still exists in some places. But here, we've just got a lot of crossover with exactly the same people, and I'd say that's probably the best, because if you can navigate, a lot of this other stuff becomes a whole lot easier.
All right, folks, episode 115 of The Dark Zone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for enjoying Barb. She was great, and thank you to her for coming on board. Be sure to check out her race, Wilderness Traverse. Well, not her race she's heavily involved in. Bob Miller does a great job with it. The de facto Canadian Championships. There's that stuff over there to the west coming up this September. But focus on Wilderness Traverse. Great race. Be sure to check it out. Thanks for being a listener. You keep racing, and we'll keep talking.